Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me into this deep dive of what computers are, how they work, all of that jazz. If you consider yourself a person terrified of computers, then this video is most certainly for you. For years, I've personally been terrified of coding. I've always wanted to understand computers and coding and all of that, but there were so many terms I couldn't wrap my head around. I read articles online, I asked friends, I asked enemies. No one could ever explain to me those very complicated concepts in what I thought should be language suitable for a 7-year-old. Whenever someone was trying to explain something to me, they would use terminology or things I wouldn't understand, and I would just get more scared and lost and eventually just not understand computers. But now, after years of research on my behalf, I think I finally got to a point where I can explain these concepts in the way that I wanted them explained to me when I was asking. So buckle up, brace yourselves. We will be covering a lot in this video. We will go through the basics of what computers have inside and what you actually see on the screen, how they are connected, how they work, and how they can be programmed through coding. There are timestamps in the description, so if you're only interested in a particular topic, then you can just skip to that. We will start with what the main components of your computer actually are. What is inside that you don't really get to see? Your computer has a processor, also called a CPU, and as the brain of the computer, it tells everyone else what to do. Nowadays, processors may have multiple cores, each of which can work on a different task, and thus making your computer more efficient. Your computer also has graphics card, which is responsible for rendering your image and basically what you see on the screen. RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory, it's basically the short-term memory of your computer. It's used by the computer to access the tasks at hand right now. And then hard drive, which refers to storage. And that allows your computer to store and use data on a more long-term basis. It's measured in megabytes, gigabytes, and most likely terabytes nowadays. Okay, so now that we figured that out, let's see how all of these components put together actually make your computer work. Inside of your computer, there's something called microtransistors. So these are tiny switches that can only be switched on or off with a small electrical charge. A single transistor is what we know as a bit or a binary digit. A byte has 8 of these bits. I also think this is a good time to talk about binary, which is a system of counting that only uses the numbers 0 and 1. So, for example, if we counted in binary, instead of being 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., it would sound something like 0, 1, 10, 11, 100, 101, 110, etc. Your computer speaks binary, meaning it spells everything in binary. It does that using an international language called ASCII. And you can see some of the examples of letters written in binary on the screen. This is basically how your computer writes. So if you had to spell the letter A in this binary system using those bits that we were talking about earlier, the transistors would look something like this. Luckily, this is not what we see on our computers when we open them up. It's not just a long string of zeros and ones that we have to decipher. And this is thanks to the operating system, which basically displays everything in a more user-friendly way. It shows you what your computer does in a way that we can actually understand. In its more general sense, the operating system is software that allows a user to run other applications on a computer device. So, example of operating systems are Microsoft, macOS, Linux, Ubuntu, and some others. Okay, I know we covered a lot of information and there's a lot of things that you need to wrap your head around, but stay with me. So now we're gonna look at how all of this relates with coding. Coding is basically language invented by people so that we can create instructions for our computers in a language that's a bit closer to English than binary. If we had to write commands for our computers in zeros and ones, we would make tons and tons of mistakes. because we're people, we're not computers. And this would just create a lot of problems for us. And this is actually how it used to be done in the beginning before the invention of these sort of coding languages. Coding languages can be used for a lot of things, including software, websites, factories. Even your microwave uses a type of coding language. Some examples of these coding languages are C, C#, HTML5, Java, Python, Ruby, etc. One thing to keep in mind about coding is that because computers are dumb, they are essentially dumb, they only recognize the instructions that they were programmed to recognize. So that means that if you make even the tiniest mistake, so let's say there is a comma missing somewhere, your computer will not be able to recognize that command. When coding specifically for a website, there are some standard languages that we use nowadays. That's HTML5, which deals with the layout and the structure of your website, so basically the content. CSS, which is the style of your website. So, for example, what font you're going to use, what colors, how are things going to be arranged in page, all of that. And then JavaScript, which deals with the interactive elements of your website. Learning even the basics of coding, or just not being terrified of it, that for me is enough. As long as you, after this video, you're not terrified of it, I consider my job having been done. And if you actually make an effort to learn these things, it will help you tremendously when you need to go and build your portfolio, for example. So if you have a team and you want to change some things, more often than not, you will need a bit of coding to actually be able to do that. When building a website, there are a few other things that you do need to be mindful of. So apart from the coding, some other things you need when you build a website are your web domain. In a simple way, this is literally the name of your website, and it's usually paid for, but there are some free out there as well. Web hosting, which is basically the location of all the files that belong to your website, such as images or videos, logos, everything, where all of these are stored. They do take up some space, so they do need some storage space somewhere, and that usually comes in the form of a server somewhere. And then you'll also need a platform to build your website. There are some free platforms out there such as WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, etc. Or some paid platforms such as GoDaddy, Bluehost, DreamHost, and many others. I really hope this made sense and that you've enjoyed it and that you feel a bit more prepared about tackling computers and coding than you did in the beginning of this video. If you do have questions or if there's anything else you would like me to cover, please let me know down below. Thank you!